Welcome to David's Stories today. An old father recounts the brutal war with his only daughter who tried to steal his entire legacy while he still breathed. What began with betrayal, guardianship plots, and a shattered jade bangle ended in the sweetest, most unexpected revenge, her total redemption, and his final victory. Subscribe, hit the bell, and buckle up for 2 hours of raw family drama. Let's begin. I still remember the smell of warm milk and talcum powder when I carried her on my shoulder at 3 in the morning because the colic wouldn't let her sleep. She weighed almost nothing, a tiny fist curled against my neck, and every time she sighed in relief, I felt like the strongest man alive. That was Mei Ling, my only daughter, the one who would later tell me I had ruined her life. Back then, her cries were the only storms I feared, and I walked the hallway for hours just to keep the thunder away from her dreams. People say a father's love is quiet, but mine roared. I built her a wooden dollhouse with real hinges on the doors, spent weeks sanding every edge so she wouldn't get splinters. She dragged it into the living room and declared it a palace, made me kneel and be knighted with a plastic sword. I still have the scar on my forehead from when she swung too hard in excitement that day. Blood ran into my eye, and I laughed because she was laughing, because she was mine, because nothing else in the world mattered. When she was 7, she asked why Grandma's picture was always on the altar, but Grandpa's wasn't. I told her Grandpa had gone far away. She nodded solemnly, then ran outside to chase dragonflies. That was the first time I lied to her. My father had hanged himself in the sugarcane field after losing everything to gambling debts, but I wanted her childhood to stay bright. I thought shielding her from darkness was love. Maybe that was the first brick in the wall that would rise between us. The time she was 12, she had opinions sharper than kitchen knives. She came home from school one day and announced that foot-binding stories were barbaric, that arranged marriages were prisons, that everything our family believed was ancient garbage. I smiled and said, "Finish your rice first, then burn the world down." She didn't smile back. That was the first time I saw contempt flicker across her face when she looked at me. I paid for piano lessons, art classes, overseas summer camps. Every report card was pinned to the fridge like medals. I told myself the money didn't matter. The factory was doing well enough. But late at night, I caught her on the phone telling friends her father was old-fashioned, that he still burned paper money for dead people, that he embarrassed her. I stood outside her door, listening, heart cracking, like thin ice, and said nothing. Fathers are supposed to be mountains, not fragile things hide inside. The worst fight of her teenage years happened over a boy. He rode a loud motorcycle, had tattoos crawling up his neck, and called me uncle with a smirk that begged for a slap. I forbade her to see him. She screamed that I was suffocating her, that I wanted her to end up lonely like me since her mother died. The word lonely hit harder than any fist could. I raised my hand not to strike, just to silence the air, and she flinched so violently I saw myself through her eyes, a violent old man clinging to dead rules. I lowered my hand, walked out the house, slept in the factory office that night. When I came home the next morning, she had packed a bag and left a note. "I'll come back when you trust me." She was 16. She didn't come back for 4 years. Those 4 years were quiet the way a grave is quiet. I kept her room exactly as she left it, dust growing thick on the dollhouse roof. Neighbors whispered that Mr. Tan's daughter had run off with that delinquent, that I must have been too strict or not strict enough. I nodded politely and kept working. The factory expanded. Money piled up like offerings no ancestor wanted. I told myself I was building an empire for her return. She came back the week before her 20th birthday. Thinner eyes, harder, holding the hand of a different man. This one in an expensive suit, speaking English with a faint American accent. His name was Victor. He shook my hand too firmly and called me sir. Mei Ling barely looked at me. She said they were getting married and needed my blessing. I asked where the motorcycle boy was. She said that was childish history. I looked at Victor's polished shoes and asked how much childish history cost these days. Victor laughed like I'd told a joke. Mei Ling didn't. That night after they left, I opened the old camphor chest where I kept my wife's jewelry. I took out the jade bangles my mother-in-law had given her on our wedding day, the ones meant for our daughter's future. I held them to the light and saw a hairline crack in one of them, invisible unless you knew where to look. Just like families, I thought. Beautiful until you notice the damage. I should have seen the storm coming then. But I was still the foolish father who believed love could fix any fracture, who thought money and silence were the same as forgiveness. I had no idea that the little girl who once knighted me with a plastic sword was sharpening a real blade, or that I would one day sharpen one of my own. The years after Mei Ling came back were like walking on thin ice that kept cracking louder with every step. She moved into the new condominium Victor bought in the city an hour's drive from the old house and visited only when she needed something. At first, it was small favors. Could I lend Victor startup capital for his import business? Could I co-sign a bank loan because his credit was still building? I signed, I lent. I told myself this was how fathers help daughters build their wings. Each time she left, she kissed my cheek with lips that barely touched skin, already turning toward the door. I noticed the way she spoke about the family house. So much land doing nothing, Baba. You could sell a portion and retire properly. I laughed and said, land was like ancestors. You don't sell them when they become inconvenient. She rolled her eyes the way she did at 12 when I talked about burning paper money. Victor, sitting beside her, smiled the smooth smile of a man who already knew the price of everything. Then came the grandchildren, two boys in quick succession. I loved them instantly, the way only a man who has waited too long can love. The elder one had my wife's eyes, the younger one had Mei Ling's temper. I bought them red packets, thick enough to choke a horse, drove to the city every weekend with boxes of toys and imported fruit. Mei Ling accepted everything, but the visits grew shorter. They're tired, Baba. Traffic is bad. One Sunday I arrived and the security guard at the condominium told me Madame had left instructions, no visitors without appointment. I stood in the lobby holding a bag of rambutan and felt the years collapse inside my chest. The real fracture came over Lunar New Year, the first one after my 72nd birthday. Tradition says the entire family returns to the ancestral house. I prepared for weeks, red couplets, freshly brushed kitchen, fragrant with pineapple tarts, the altar gleaming. Only half the relatives showed up. Mei Ling sent a text the night before Victor had surprised her with a ski trip to Japan. The boys were too young for long flights back. Sorry, La, next year definitely. I stared at the message until the screen went black. My cousins asked where she was. I lied and said she was sick. They nodded, but their eyes said they knew. That night I sat alone in the courtyard drinking baijiu from the bottle my brother sent from China. The moon was cold and perfect, the kind that makes old men remember every mistake. I thought of my own father, how he used to slap me across the face for forgetting to bow deep enough to the ancestors. I had sworn I would never raise a hand to my child. I had kept that promise, but maybe I had bent too far the other way, let her grow up believing respect was optional. 2 months later, she called voice sweet, like poisoned honey. Victor's business needed another injection, bigger this time. The bank was being difficult. If I transferred my savings into their joint account temporarily, just 6 months, they could secure a huge contract. Then everything would be returned with interest. I asked to see the contract. She laughed and said, Baba, don't be so old-fashioned. Family should trust family. I said I trusted family. I didn't trust pieces of paper I couldn't read. Silence crackled down the line. Then very quietly, fine. Keep your money in your crumbling house. See how long you last alone. She hung up. I sat in my study staring at the framed photograph from her university graduation. She was smiling, mortarboard tilted, my hand on her shoulder. I remembered how proud I felt that day, how I told everyone my daughter would never need to bow to any man. Now I understood the joke was on me. That week I went to the lawyer, the same one who handled my wife's estate. I asked questions I never thought I would ask. How does one protect assets from one's own child? How thin can the ice get before it breaks completely? He explained trusts, conditions, clauses, sharp as fishhooks. I listened and felt something inside me harden the way green mango hardens when you soak it in salt. I started small tests. I told Mei Ling the factory was struggling, that I might need to borrow from her instead. She panicked, voice climbing 2 octaves. Baba, don't be ridiculous. You have the land, sell a plot, solve everything. I said land prices were down. She suggested I mortgage the house. I said banks don't lend to old men with no income. For the first time, she lost her temper. On the phone, called me stubborn, selfish, said I was hoarding wealth that rightfully belonged to her children. I let her scream. When she finished, I said gently, so now it's about your children's rights, not mine. She hung up again. the space between us filled with poison gas. Relatives stopped asking when Mei Ling would visit. They already knew the answer. My sister tried to mediate, invited us both to dinner. Mei Ling arrived late, left early, barely spoke to me. On the drive home, I caught sight of her car in the rearview mirror, sleek and black, racing past like she couldn't wait to be rid of the evening rid of me. I began keeping a notebook. Every demand, every insult, every canceled plan I wrote down in neat columns, dates times exact words. The lawyer had told me evidence matters. I thought evidence was for courtrooms, but maybe families have courtrooms too, invisible ones where verdicts are whispered over deathbeds. Some nights I took out the jade bangles again, the cracked ones. I turned them under the lamp and imagined slipping them onto wrists that no longer belonged to my little girl. I wondered if jade could absorb anger the way it absorbs light. I wondered if anything could. By the time the storm fully broke, I was ready not with shouting, not with fists, but with the quiet patience of a man who has nothing left to lose except the last illusion that love alone is enough. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope scented with lavender, the kind my wife used to spritz on her letters. Mei Ling's handwriting slanted elegantly across the front, announcing her wedding to Victor in 6 months. I held it in the kitchen, steam from the kettle curling around my fingers, and felt a mix of joy and dread coil in my gut. Joy because my daughter was stepping into the life I had always imagined for her. Dread because Victor's eyes reminded me of a fox in a henhouse, always calculating the value of feathers. I called her that evening. "Congratulations, my girl. When do we meet his family?" Silence hummed on the line before she said, "Victor's parents are in America, Baba. They can't make it. It's just a small ceremony anyway." Small ceremony? For my only daughter, I swallowed the protest and asked about the date. It was set for a Saturday in May. No consultation with the almanac, no auspicious hour chosen by a geomancer. Traditions are for villages, Baba. We're modern now. Her voice carried that edge, the one that sliced without drawing blood. The planning became a battlefield disguised as phone calls. She wanted a white gown from Paris, a cake taller than a child, a venue at a 5-star hotel overlooking the harbor. I offered to pay as fathers do, but insisted on some customs, the tea ceremony, the red envelopes, the lion dance to ward off evil. Victor chimed in during one call, his accent polished like his shoes. "Sir, we appreciate the input, but we're keeping it simple. No need for superstitions." Superstitions, the rituals that bound my parents that I had followed for my own wedding. I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. Relatives began calling excited whispers about the match. My sister warned me Victor came from new money, the kind made fast and spent faster. I drove to the city, unannounced one afternoon, found their apartment in a tower of glass and steel. Mei Ling opened the door in yoga pants, surprise flickering to annoyance. "Baba, what are you doing here?" I handed her a box of mooncakes early for the festival, but a peace offering. Victor emerged from the study, laptop in hand, smile fixed like a mask. We sat in their living room, furniture sleek and uncomfortable, no family photos on the walls. I asked about his work. Imports, exports, global trade. Vague as fog. I pressed family background. Orphaned young, made my own way. Mei Ling shot him a look, then me. "Baba, stop interrogating. This isn't the Cultural Revolution." I laughed it off, but inside I noted the evasion, the way his fingers tapped the armrest like counting coins. As the date approached, the conflicts sharpened. She refused the ancestral hall. For the reception, called it dusty and irrelevant. I argued it was where her grandparents married, where her mother's spirit could bless her. "Mom's dead, Baba. Let her rest." The words landed like a slap. I hung up and paced the old house floorboards, creaking under my weight. That night I dreamed of my wife, young and laughing, pinning orchids in her hair. I woke with tears drying on my cheeks. The rehearsal dinner was a farce. Victor's friends, all young professionals in tailored suits, toasted with champagne while I nursed tea. One joked about old-school dads, and everyone laughed except me. Mei Ling pulled me aside. "Try to fit in, Baba. Don't embarrass me." Embarrass I, who had built everything she stood on. I nodded, but the seed of resentment sprouted deeper roots. On the wedding day, the hotel ballroom glittered like a false promise. I walked her down the aisle in my best suit, arm linked with hers, feeling her tension through the fabric. At the altar, Victor waited smug as ever. The vows were in English, no mention of filial piety or eternal bonds. During the tea ceremony, I had forced them to include Mei Ling, knelt reluctantly serving me tea, with hands that trembled, not from emotion, but impatience. Victor spilled a drop on the saucer, laughed it off. I accepted with a smile that hid the storm. After the toasts, I slipped away to the balcony, city lights sprawling below like scattered jewels. A cousin found me there, clapped my shoulder. She's happy, uncle. That's what matters. Was it she, or was this the beginning of her erasing me piece by piece? The honeymoon was to Bali, paid for by me as a gift. They returned tanned and distant visits even rarer. Then the calls started again. The apartment was too small now with the boys growing. Could I help with a down payment on a house? I asked why Victor's business couldn't cover it. Mei Ling snapped, you always distrust him. Why can't you just support us? I had given everything. That's when I first felt the pull towards something darker, a quiet plotting in the back of my mind. One evening alone in the study, I opened the safe where I kept the deeds. The family land, the factory shares, all in my name. I traced the signatures, remembering the sweat that earned them. Mei Ling had once drawn pictures on the back of old contracts as a child, castles and dragons. Now she saw them as currency. The distrust festered. I hired a private investigator discreetly through a friend. The report came in a plain envelope. Victor had debts, bad investments, a mistress in another city. I read it under lamplight, heart pounding. Should I tell her, ruin the marriage I had walked her into? I burned the pages in the courtyard, ashes swirling like lost opportunities. But the knowledge changed me. Conversations became laced with hints. Be careful with money, daughter. Not everyone is who they seem. She accused me of jealousy, of wanting to control her life. Arguments escalated over holidays, her voice rising in the old house. You're stuck in the past. Baba, Victor and I are building a future without your chains. One Christmas she arrived without him, boys in tow. He's working. I knew better but said nothing. The younger grandson asked why Grandpa lived alone in such a big house. Mei Ling shushed him. That night after they left, I sat by the window watching taillights fade and vowed silently if she pushed further, I would push back, not with force, but with the cunning of a man who has lost too much. The traditions she mocked became my weapons, hidden in plain sight. I started rewriting the will clause by clause, ensuring nothing was simple. The game had begun, though she didn't know it yet. The first time she said the word inheritance like a threat, I was slicing pomelo in the kitchen for the Mid-Autumn Festival. She stood in the doorway, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, and asked why I hadn't put the house in her name yet. You're 75, Baba. What if something happens? Victor says it's smarter for tax reasons. I kept peeling the thick green skin, curling away in one long spiral. Victor says a lot of things, I answered. The knife slipped and nicked my thumb. Blood dripped onto the white flesh of the fruit. She didn't notice. She was already looking at her screen. That was the beginning of the open war over property. She came more often after that, always with folders, always with advice. She brought glossy brochures of retirement villages. You'd have nurses' activities, friends your age. Translation, get out of the house so we can sell it. She spoke about capital gains tax, about subdividing the land, about how the boys needed space to grow up properly. Each sentence began with "for your own good" and ended with a price tag. I listened, nodded, served her tea in the good porcelain cups her mother loved. Then I asked innocent questions. So if I move to this village, who pays the monthly fees? She hesitated. Victor from the sofa jumped in. We'll handle it, sir. Family looks after family. I smiled the way crocodiles smile and said I'd think about it. At night, I spread the land titles across the dining table like mahjong tiles. 28 acres along the old railway, bought dirt cheap when I was 35, and the government still thought factories belonged in the countryside. Now the train line was being extended, stations planned, developers circling. The value had multiplied 30 times. My daughter knew the numbers better than I did. She had spreadsheets. She grew bolder. One Sunday she arrived with a surveyor, a young man in a polo shirt who kept calling me uncle. They walked the boundary with a measuring tape while I watched from the veranda. When they came back, she said brightly, we could split off the back 5 acres, Baba. Quick sale, cash in the bank, everyone happy. I asked what everyone meant. She laughed like wind chimes hiding knives. I began leaving fake documents around the house offers from developers addressed to me ridiculously low-marked urgent. She found them, of course. Her eyes lit the way they used to when she spotted a new doll in the shop window. She started pressing harder, signed now, Baba, before the market cools. I played senile, asked her to explain the same clause 3 times, then said I needed to pray about it. The fights moved from polite suggestions to shouting. She accused me of selfishness, of punishing her for marrying Victor, of hoarding wealth that should fund her children's future. I reminded her the land was bought with money earned while she was still in diapers. She screamed that diapers didn't matter, blood did. I'm your only child. It's mine by right, I told her. Rights are earned, not born. She slammed the door so hard the ancestor portraits rattled. Then came the forged letter. I found it in the mailbox one morning, typed on law firm letterhead, informing me that Mr. and Mrs. Victor Lim had filed a petition claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my assets and requesting guardianship. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the front step. The letter was clever dates of incidents, when I forgot names at family dinners, the time I left the stove on the afternoon I fell asleep in the garden. All true, all twisted. They had been collecting evidence like crows collect shiny trash. I folded the letter into a perfect square and slipped it into the pocket of my old cardigan. Then I called my lawyer, not the family one, a new man recommended by a business friend who dealt with hostile takeovers. We met in his office above a dim sum restaurant. I laid the titles, the fake offers, the guardianship letter, on his desk. He read without expression, then asked one question. How far do you want to go, Mr. Ton? I told him all the way to the bottom if necessary. He smiled for the first time. Good. Then we start with a medical examination. Independent. And we change the locks on the narrative. That week I visited 3 doctors, all respectable, all expensive. Full cognitive tests, brain scans, the works. Results: mild memory lapses, consistent with age, nothing more. I had certificates thicker than a phone book. Then I rewrote my will again, this time, with clauses so convoluted they would tie up probate for years. I created a family trust with myself as sole trustee for life beneficiaries to be named later. I moved half the liquid assets into accounts requiring 2 signatures, mine and a cousin she hated. Every move, quiet, legal, lethal. Meanwhile, I fed her just enough hope to keep her greedy. I let her bring another developer to the house, let them measure again, let her taste the sale. I even signed a non-binding letter of intent, knowing it meant nothing. She danced around the living room like a child who'd been promised the moon. The night she brought the final sale agreement for my signature, she arrived alone. Victor was busy. She wore the jade bangles I had given her on her 21st birthday, the cracked ones. They looked heavy on her thin wrists. She laid the papers in front of me, pen uncapped, smile radiant. Sign, Baba. Then we're all free. I took the pen, turned it between my fingers, and asked one question. Tell me again why the guardianship petition. Her face froze, then rearranged itself into innocence. What petition? You must be confused. I pulled the folded letter from my pocket, smoothed it on the table. She stared at it like it was a snake. I signed nothing that night. I poured her tea, watched her hands shake, and felt the first cold satisfaction settle in my bones. The war over property had entered its sharpest phase, and for the first time in years, I held the better cards. After the guardianship letter, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a chessboard where every room hid a trap. She still came, but now the air between us crackled with static. The boys were kept away, too much schoolwork, so it was just the 2 of us circling each other across the teak dining table that once seated 20 relatives laughing over reunion dinners. Mornings began with small provocations. I would find the kitchen cabinets rearranged. My medicines moved to higher shelves in case you dropped them, Baba. My reading glasses vanished and reappeared inside her handbag. She started cooking for me always. Too salty, always with comments. You shouldn't eat so much oil at your age. I ate every bite and thanked her loudly, watching her jaw tighten. Afternoons were worse. She brought stacks of forms: power of attorney, medical consent, bank authorization. Each time I said I needed to read them overnight. Each night I photographed every page with my phone and sent them to the lawyer. He sent back annotated versions dripping with red flags. I left those annotated copies in plain sight on the desk. She found them, of course. The next day, the forms stopped coming. We fought over everything now. The garden she wanted to trim the old rambutan tree because it blocks the view for future buyers. I told her the tree was older than she was and had fed 3 generations. She hired a gardener anyway. I paid him double to leave it untouched. She found out and screamed in the courtyard that I was wasting money that belonged to her children. I asked which children, since she never brought them to see the tree. She threw the pruning saw on the ground so hard the blade chipped. Evenings were silent battles of endurance. She stayed later and later, waiting for me to go to bed first, so she could prowl the study. I pretended to sleep in the armchair, eyes cracked open, watching her silhouette under the desk lamp. She opened drawers, photographed documents, closed them again with the soft click of a thief who believes herself unseen. I let her. Every photograph she took was another nail. One night, the fight turned ugly in a way I will never forget. She had discovered that I moved the original land titles to a bank vault whose key only I possessed. She stormed into my bedroom at 11, hair wild, eyes blazing. "Where are they, Baba? You think I'm stupid?" I sat up slowly, heart hammering. "They're safe," she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Safe from your own daughter. I carried your grandchildren. I wiped your wife's vomit when she was dying, and you treat me like a thief." I told her calmly that thieves announce themselves with lawyers and guardianship papers. She slapped me. Not hard, more shock than pain, but the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. My cheek burned. For one terrible second, I saw my own father's hand rising in me. I clenched my fists until the nails dug crescents into my palms. I did not raise them. Instead, I said very quietly, "Do it again, and you will never set foot in this house." She cried then, sudden and shocking, the way she used to when she was 6 and skinned her knee. "Why are you doing this to me?" she sobbed. "What did I ever do except try to look after you?" I almost weakened. Almost. Then I remembered the forged medical reports, the mistress's address in the investigator's file, the way Victor looked at my land like a starving man looks at rice. I hardened my voice. "Go home, Mei Ling. Come back when you remember whose daughter you are." She left at 2 in the morning, tires screeching down the gravel driveway. I sat on the edge of the bed, cheeks still stinging, and felt the house settle around me like an old dog guarding its master. The next day, I changed every lock, installed cameras she didn't know about, and moved into the guest room on the ground floor so no footsteps could creep above me at night. I also started leaving deliberate breadcrumbs, a fake will on the desktop, naming a charity for abandoned elders, an open email to the lawyer discussing selling everything to a developer who would turn the land into condominiums. I even recorded a video message in case I die, suddenly tearfully explaining that my daughter had abandoned me and I had no choice. She found all of it within a week. The visits became frantic. She brought Victor once, who tried sweet-talking me about family unity. I offered him tea and asked how his bankruptcy petition in 2011 was going. His smile froze. Mei Ling dragged him out by the elbow. The daily clashes became ritual. She accused, I deflected. She threatened, I smiled. She cried, I handed her tissues and reminded her blood pressure was hereditary. I cooked her favorite dishes and watched her push food around the plate, afraid I had poisoned them. I never did, of course. Poison is crude. I preferred slow-acting venom. One afternoon, she found the old camphor chest open, the cracked jade bangles laid out like evidence. She picked one up, eyes filling. "You still keep these?" I told her yes, because some cracks never heal, but we carry them anyway. She slipped the bangle onto her wrist right next to the diamond bracelet Victor bought her, and for a moment, she was my little girl again. Then her phone buzzed Victor, and the moment shattered. That night, I added a new clause to the trust: any beneficiary who challenges my mental capacity forfeits everything. The lawyer called it a poison pill. I called it insurance. By the end of that month, the house reeked of war jasmine from her perfume mixed with the metallic taste of fear. She stopped pretending affection. I stopped pretending forgiveness. We moved through the rooms like ghosts who had once loved each other, waiting for the next blow. And somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, I began to smile at what was coming. I knew the exact day she decided I was no longer her father but an obstacle, because that was the day she stopped calling me Baba and started calling me Mr. Tan in front of the maid. The maid told me later, eyes wide with fear, that Madam had spent an hour in my study with the door locked, speaking in a low voice on the phone. I thanked the maid, gave her a red packet thick enough to buy silence, and waited. That night I sat in the dark living room with only the altar candles burning and opened the safe behind the portrait of my wife. Inside were the things Mei Ling had been hunting for months, the original share certificates of the factory, now worth tens of millions after the merger, the title deeds, and a plain manila envelope I had never shown anyone. Inside the envelope were photographs the private investigator had taken over the last year of Victor leaving a certain apartment in Johor every Tuesday at 2 a.m. Victor signing documents with the man known for laundering money, and most precious of all, Victor and Mei Ling together at a lawyer's office, laughing as they slid a psychiatric evaluation across the table. The evaluation declared me moderately severe, cognitive impairment, unable to manage finances. The doctor's signature was real. The doctor had been paid very well. I closed the envelope, slipped it into the inner pocket of my old songkok jacket, and felt the weight settle against my heart like a second, colder heart. From that night on, I began to play the fool perfectly. I let my hands tremble when I poured tea. I asked the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. I forgot where I put my glasses while wearing them on my head. I shuffled instead of walked. The maid reported everything to Mei Ling because Mei Ling had doubled her salary. I knew because I had tripled it the week before. She started bringing witnesses. First, her cousin from Penang, then Victor's business partner, then a social worker who happened to drop by. They all saw an old man who couldn't remember if he had eaten lunch, who called his daughter by his dead wife's name, who stared at the altar for hours asking the ancestors where his little girl had gone. They left shaking their heads, pity thick in their throats. Mei Ling's eyes glowed with triumph. She moved into the house temporarily to take care of me. Victor stayed in the city business demands, but his car was parked in the driveway every weekend. They turned the guest wing into their command center. I heard printers running at night, hushed arguments about timelines, the clink of whiskey glasses, celebrating steps closer to victory. I let them. I let her hide my medication so I would seem confused. I let her move the factory files to her room. I let her change the Wi-Fi password so I couldn't accidentally call anyone. When she took my phone to update the contacts, I handed it over with shaking fingers and tears in my eyes. Inside the phone was already wiped clean, except for one recorded voicemail I had left. Myself, a confused old man pleading for someone to help him because his daughter was stealing everything. The trap was almost ready. One evening, she sat me down in the living room like a child and explained very slowly that for my own safety, I needed to sign some papers. The papers were thick power of attorney sale agreements already negotiated with a developer transfer of the factory shares into a new holding company controlled by her and Victor. She had even prepared a video statement where I would thank her for taking care of me in my declining years. I stared at the pen she placed in my hand. My fingers shook just enough. I looked up at her with watery eyes and asked, "Will you still visit me in the nursing home, Mei Ling?" She softened for 1 second the way sunlight breaks through storm clouds, then the mask slammed back. "Of course, Baba. Every week." I signed the first page with a squiggle that barely looked like my name. She exhaled a sound of pure victory. That night, I waited until the house was asleep. I walked no longer shuffling to the study, opened the hidden panel behind the bookshelf my father had built in 1963, and removed the real documents I had replaced with perfect forgeries months earlier. The forgeries were beautiful, same paper stock, same faded ink, same tiny coffee stain on page 7. Only a handful of experts in the world could tell the difference, and none of them worked for her. I carried the real documents to the kitchen, placed them inside a metal tin that once held my wife's butter cookies, and buried the tin beneath the pomelo tree she wanted to cut down. Then I went back to bed and slept better than I had in years. 2 days later, I fell in the garden. The maid screamed. Mei Ling came running. Victor arrived within minutes, too fast, as if he had been waiting nearby. They called an ambulance. At the hospital, I babbled, called the nurses. Daughter asked where my wife was. The doctors ran tests. I made sure to fail the memory questions exactly the way a declining man would. They admitted me for observation. Mei Ling held my hand in the ward, eyes shining with tears that never quite fell. She whispered that everything would be all right now that she was taking care of everything. I squeezed her fingers weakly and whispered back, "Thank you, my good daughter." That same afternoon, while she sat by my bedside thinking me asleep, I heard her on the phone. "Yes, the doctor confirmed moderate dementia. We'll file next week. Once the power of attorney is registered, the developer transfers the first tranche, 3 months maximum. I opened my eyes just a slit and watched her smile the way a cat smiles at a bird with a broken wing. She had no idea the wing was never broken. And she had no idea that every room in my house, every corridor, every corner of the garden, now carried tiny recording devices paid for by the sale of a watch my father gave me in 1978. They had been running for 4 months. The maid had installed the last one that very morning, trembling, because I had promised her enough money to send her son to university in Australia. The net was drawn tight. All that remained was to pull the rope. The first time she called me a useless old bastard to my face, I was sitting at the breakfast table peeling a hard-boiled egg. The words left her mouth the way steam escapes a kettle, sudden scalding impossible to take back. She was late for some meeting with a developer, hair still wet from the shower phone glued to her ear. Victor was already in the car honking. She thought I was too deaf or too senile to hear. I heard every syllable. I kept peeling the egg slow circles, letting the shell flake onto the rose-patterned plate my wife bought in Malacca 35 years ago. When the last piece of shell fell away, I looked up and said very clearly, "Your mother taught you better language than that." She froze, phone halfway to her ear, then spat, "My mother isn't here to save you anymore," and slammed the door so hard the teacups rattled. That was the morning the gloves came off. After that, insults became her native tongue. In front of the maid, in front of the driver, in front of her own children, when she finally brought them for a weekend. "Don't mind Grandpa, he's losing it. Don't touch that, Grandpa will accuse you of stealing. Just ignore him," he repeats himself. Each word was a small knife slipped between ribs where no one else could see the blood. I answered with silence at first, then with confusion, real confusion. Sometimes because age is cruel and memory does slip. That only made her bolder. She started shouting across rooms. I said, "Move your legs, old man, you're blocking the doorway." Or when I took too long coming down the stairs, "Hurry up or I'll push you myself." One afternoon, I dropped a bowl of hot soup. Its shattered broth splashed across the tiles. A piece of porcelain sliced my shin. She stood over me, screaming that I was a liability, that the insurance wouldn't cover clumsiness, that I was costing her money with every breath. The maid hovered, terrified. I looked up from the floor, blood running into my sock, and said, "Clean it yourself, daughter. This is still my house." She laughed, actually laughed, and walked away, heels clicking like gunshots. The worst came on a Thursday in late October. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolling like ancestral drums. Victor was away on business. I knew which apartment he was in. Mei Ling had been drinking expensive red wine she took from my cellar without asking. She cornered me in the study, waving a bank statement. I had quietly frozen one of the joint accounts she thought she controlled. She was hysterical. The developer needed a deposit tomorrow. The lawyers were waiting. How dare I sabotage her future? I told her calmly that nothing was frozen, perhaps a bank error. She threw the statement at my face. Papers fluttered like white birds. Then she grabbed the front of my shirt, both fists, and shook me the way you shake a coconut to see if it's gone bad. "You're doing this on purpose, you evil old man. You want me to fail. You want your grandchildren on the street." I felt the fabric tear at the collar. My reading glasses flew off and cracked against the desk. Something inside me snapped. Not anger. Something colder. I seized her wrists harder than I had touched another human being since the day I carried my wife's coffin. She gasped. For one heartbeat, we stared at each other, father and daughter, two animals measuring the distance to the throat. I let go first, stepped back. My voice came out steady, almost kind. "Touch me again, and I will show you what an evil old man can really do." She stumbled backward, eyes wide, suddenly small. Then the rage flooded back twice as hot. She screamed every curse she knew in Hokkien, in Mandarin. In English, called me a monster, a miser, a living corpse who should have died with his wife. Saliva flecked her lips. She swept everything off my desk lamp, books, the framed photo of her at 6 years old in a red cheongsam. Glass exploded across the floor. I didn't move, just watched her destroy the room the way she had been destroying me piece by piece. When she ran out of breath, she stood panting among the wreckage, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint. I said, "Are you finished?" She spat at my feet and left. The front door slammed. The car roared away. I knelt slowly among the shards, found the photograph of 6-year-old Mei Ling brushed off the glass. Her smile was missing one front tooth. I pressed the picture to my chest and felt something inside me die quietly, the last soft part. That night, I moved the final pieces on the board. I called the cousin she hated us, saying they're the one who still lit joss sticks every morning, and invited him to stay because I'm frightened of my own daughter now. Aseng arrived the next day with 2 suitcases and the loyal heart of a pit bull. I gave him the spare room overlooking the driveway. I transferred the last of the liquid funds into an account requiring both my signature and Aseng's. I signed a new medical power of attorney, naming Aseng, not her. I mailed certified copies to every relative, every temple committee I still belonged, to every old friend who once carried my wife's coffin. Let the news spread the old-fashioned way gossip over tea, whispers at funerals. Then I waited for her to come back and scream again. She did 3 days later. Aseng opened the door. She saw him and turned white. What is he doing here? I sat in my armchair, calm as a Buddha. He's family. You said family takes care of family. Remember? She tried to push past him. Aseng blocked the doorway with his bulk. For the first time in her life, my daughter realized there were men in this house she could not bully. She shouted. She threatened police. She threatened lawsuits. I let her. Every word went into the little black microphone clip beneath the coffee table. When she finally ran out of air, I spoke once softly. You wanted war, Mei Ling. War has rules. I'm simply following yours. She stared at me across the ruined study, broken glass still on the floor, books swollen with rain that had come through the open window, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Good. The mind games were no longer subtle. They were war by other means, and I had just fired the first open shot. The night I decided to break her completely, the moon was hidden behind clouds thick as funeral cloth. I sat in the dark kitchen with a single red candle burning on the table, the kind we use for Hungry Ghost Month, and laid out my weapons. The manila envelope, a USB drive the size of a matchstick, and the cracked jade bangle I had taken back from her wrist while she slept off the wine 3 nights earlier. I turned the bangle in my fingers until the fracture caught the candlelight like a lightning bolt frozen in green stone. Aseng was asleep upstairs. The house was silent except for the old refrigerator humming like a guilty conscience. I poured myself a small glass of Hennessy I had been saving since my 60th birthday and drank it slowly, letting the burn remind me I was still alive, still dangerous. At 2:17 a.m., I walked barefoot to her bedroom, the one she had claimed as temporary 6 months ago, and opened the door without knocking. She was sprawled across the bed, one arm, dangling mouth slightly open, the exhaustion of greed finally catching up. The diamond bracelet Victor gave her glinted on the nightstand. I stood over her for a long time, long enough to remember the weight of her 3-year-old body on my shoulder, long enough to feel the last flicker of mercy die. I placed the cracked jade bangle on her pillow, right beside her cheek. Then I left. She found it at dawn. I was already in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard the scream. Not rage this time, but something rawer. She ran downstairs, still in her silk nightgown, hair wild bangle clenched in her fist. What is this supposed to mean? Her voice cracked like thin ice. I didn't answer at first. I poured coffee into 2 cups, slid one across the table. She ignored it. Answer me, old man. I looked at her, then really looked. The woman in front of me had the same cheekbones as the little girl who once begged me to push her higher on the swing, but everything else was foreign, poisoned by wanting, by Victor, by the belief that love can be measured in acres and zeros. I spoke softly. It means the crack has always been there, Mei Ling. You just never noticed until it cut you. She hurled the bangle at my head. I didn't duck. It struck my forehead, split, then skin blood ran warm down the side of my nose. She watched it drip onto the white tablecloth, and something in her face collapsed. Not regret calculation. She was measuring how much further she could push before I bled out completely. That was the moment I stopped pretending. I reached into my pocket and laid the USB drive beside her coffee cup. Watch it when you're ready to understand what happens next. She snatched it, stormed upstairs. 10 minutes later, the house shook with her sobbing. No, not sobbing, howling. Animal sounds that made Aseng appear into the doorway, eyes wide. I waved him away. She came back down barefoot, face blotched red, clutching printouts of the photographs Victor. With his mistress Victor signing dirty money transfers, and worst of all, Victor and Mei Ling herself at the lawyer's office, toasting with champagne over my forged psychiatric report. The timestamp on the last photo was 3 weeks ago. She couldn't speak. She just stood there, her shaking papers fluttering like dying birds. I finally broke the silence. You taught me a new game, daughter. Record everything, plan every move, destroy the enemy before they know they're dead. I simply played better. She found her voice, then a broken whisper. What do you want? Everything you tried to take from me, I said, but I'm willing to be merciful. I laid out the terms like a surgeon laying out scalpels. First, she would sign a document confessing to attempted fraud forgery and elder abuse dated witnessed, notarized copies all ready with 3 separate lawyers. Second, Victor would be gone from her life by sunset tomorrow. Divorce papers were already prepared. The mistress had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Third, the boys, my grandsons, would spend every weekend and all school holidays here with me until they turned 18. She would bring them herself. She would sit at my table, eat my food, and smile while they called me Grandpa. Fourth, the house, the land, the factory. Everything would be transferred into a trust for the boys, irrevocable with me as sole trustee until my death. She would receive a monthly allowance generous enough to keep her comfortable, small enough to remind her who held the knife now. She laughed, then a terrible cracked sound. You think I'll agree to this? I wiped the blood from my forehead with a napkin and smiled the way a wolf smiles at a cornered deer. No, I said. I think you'll beg. I pressed play on the remote in my pocket. The living room television flickered to life. The screen showed the study 3 nights ago, her shaking me, screaming, sweeping everything off the desk. The audio was perfect. Every curse, every threat, every shard of glass hitting the floor. Then it cut to the hospital corridor, her on the phone, 3 months maximum. Her knees buckled. She caught the edge of the table to keep from falling. I turned the television off. Copies went out this morning, I said. To your cousins, to the temple committee, to the boys' school principal, to Victor's investors. By tomorrow evening, half the country will have seen what kind of daughter Mr. Tan raised. She slid to the floor's nightgown, pooling around her like spilled milk, and for the first time since she was a child, she looked small. I crouched beside her, stroked her hair the way I did when she had nightmares. Shh, I whispered. Papa is going to fix everything now, she cried, then real tears, ugly and loud, the kind that come when the mask is ripped off and the face underneath is unrecognizable, even to its owner. I let her cry. When she was spent, I helped her to the chair, placed a pen in her shaking hand, and opened the confession document to the signature page. She signed. The bangle lay on the table between us, cracked forever. She moved like a ghost for the first week after she signed. She slept in the old nursery now, stripped of toys and full of boxes she never opened. Rose at noon, drank coffee black, and stared at the garden, as though the rambutan tree might speak and tell her what to do next. I left her alone. The house was large enough for 2 people to never meet if they didn't want to, and we didn't want to. Ah Seng kept watch from the kitchen. He had become my shadow, broad and silent, making sure she never left the property with anything more than the clothes on her back. The boys arrived every Friday at 4 o'clock sharp, dropped off by a driver who now worked for me, not her. She stood on the front steps in sunglasses too big for her thin face, kissed them mechanically, and watched them run to me shouting gong gong, the way they used to shout mama when they were toddlers. That sound cut her every single time. I pretended not to notice. I made the weekends perfect. I bought kites, fishing rods, a second-hand PlayStation. I cooked Hokkien mee the way their grandmother did, with pork fat crackling loud enough to wake the dead. I taught them to climb the rambutan tree she once wanted cut down. They came home with scratched knees and sticky fingers and stories they told their mother in breathless bursts. She listened from the doorway, arms folded tight, smiling the thin smile of someone chewing glass. One Saturday night after the boys were asleep, I found her in the courtyard burning something in the metal incense bin. The flames lit her face orange and cruel. It was the divorce papers. Victor had signed them the day before faster than anyone expected. She had received a courier envelope with no note, only his signature, and a post-it that read, "Good luck." She fed the pages to the fire one by one, watching the legal words curl and blacken. When the last corner turned to ash, she looked up and saw me watching. "You won," she said. Her voice was hoarse from smoke and crying. I didn't answer. Victory tasted like ash, too. The relatives began to arrive in slow, curious waves. First my sister, then cousins from Ipoh, then old factory workers who had heard rumors. They came for tea, for gossip, for the spectacle of Mei Ling serving them with her own hands, head bowed, refilling cups without being asked. They spoke in low voices about karma, about children who forget the hands that carried them. She heard every word. I watched her knuckles go white around the teapot. One evening, the temple committee chairman came, an old friend of my father's. He brought mooncakes and condolences for the trouble in the family. Mei Ling served him in the living room, kneeling to offer the plate the way daughters-in-law do. He patted her head absently, the way you pat a dog you don't particularly like, and told me loudly, "You did the right thing, Tan. Some children need to be taught twice." She kept her eyes on the floor, but I saw the tremor in her shoulders. I began leaving the video files playing on loop in the study when I knew she would pass by. The footage of her, shaking me, screaming, throwing the photograph, the hospital phone call, the toast with Victor over my supposed dementia report. She would stop in the doorway frozen, listening to her own voice promise ruin in exchange for money. Then she would walk away faster, heels clicking like a countdown. The boys started asking questions. Why does Mama cry in the bathroom? Why can't she tuck us in anymore? Why does she look at you like you're a stranger? Gong gong. I answered gently. Mama is tired. Grown-ups get tired in ways children don't understand yet. But children understand more than we think. The elder one began bringing me his mother's phone when she fell asleep on the sofa, whispering, "There are bad messages, gong gong, from Papa." I deleted them all, then tucked him in and told him, warriors protect their mothers even when mothers forget how to be kind. One night the storm came, not rain, an emotional typhoon. She waited until the boys were asleep, then walked into my room without knocking. Barefoot, wearing the old university t-shirt she used to sleep in when she was 17. She carried the cracked jade bangle in both hands like an offering. "I want to leave," she said. "Let me take the boys and go." I was reading under the lamp glasses, low on my nose. I closed the book slowly. "You signed the trust. You know the terms. I'll live in a rented room. I'll scrub floors. Just let me have my children." "Your children," I repeated, tasting the words. "The ones you were ready to put in private schools with money you planned to steal from a senile old man." She flinched as if I had struck her. Then she did something I never expected. She knelt. Not the graceful kneel of tradition, but collapsed forehead, touching the floor the way criminals do in old movies when the sentence is read. "Please, Baba," she whispered to the carpet. "I was wrong. I was greedy and stupid and cruel. Punish me, not them." I looked down at the crown of her head, hair thin in places from stress, and felt the old sorrow rise like bile. This was the moment I had dreamed of for 2 years, my proud daughter on her knees begging. It should have tasted sweet. It tasted of nothing. I stood, walked around her, and opened the door. Ah Seng was in the hallway. He was always in the hallway now. I told him to bring tea. When he returned, she was still kneeling. I placed the tray on the floor in front of her. "Drink," I said. She obeyed, hands shaking so badly the cup rattled against the saucer. I sat again and spoke the truth I had carried like a tumor. "You want to know the real punishment, Mei Ling. It isn't the trust or the videos or the relatives whispering. The real punishment is that every morning you wake up and remember who you became. And every night you go to sleep knowing your father saw it all." She made a sound like a wounded animal. I leaned forward until our faces were inches apart. "You will stay in this house until the boys no longer need you to drive them here. You will smile when they call me Gong Gong. You will watch them love the tree you wanted to kill. And one day, when they are old enough to understand, they will ask you why their mother once tried to steal their grandfather's grave. That daughter is the revenge that keeps on giving." I stood, leaving her on the floor with the cold tea. As I walked out, I heard the jade bangle fall from her lap and break completely in two. The first piece of the broken jade bangle stayed on the floor for 3 days. I stepped over it every time I passed the hallway, the sharp green edge catching the light like a warning. On the fourth morning, I found it gone. Mei Ling had swept it up before the maid arrived, wrapped the shards in red thread, and placed them inside the small altar beside her mother's photograph. She lit a joss stick and stood there longer than she had stood anywhere in years. I watched from the staircase silent as a ghost and felt something shift inside the house, the way air shifts before rain finally breaks. She began to change in small, almost invisible ways. She woke before the roosters now made coffee for us sang, and the driver set an extra cup at my place without being asked. She started cooking again, proper Peranakan dishes. Her mother taught her the ones that take hours of pounding, rumpa, and slow simmering. The boys noticed first. Junwei tugged my sleeve one Saturday. Mama made ayam buah keluak. She said it's for you. Gong gong because you like the bitter one. I ate 3 helpings and told her it tasted like 1998, the year her mother won the church cooking contest. She looked at the tablecloth when I said it, but her shoulders didn't flinch the way they used to. The weekend stretched into something almost peaceful. She no longer sat frozen at the kitchen table. She helped the boys with homework, laughed when Junhao tried to cheat at Scrabble, let Junwei fall asleep against her shoulder during old Jackie Chan movies. When they asked to sleep in her room instead of the bunk beds I had built, she looked at me first, eyes asking permission. I nodded once. That night I heard her singing the same lullaby my wife used to sing. Voice cracked but steady, and I stood outside the door longer than a man my age should stand anywhere. One Sunday in early April, the boys wanted to fly kites at the old field behind the factory. The wind was perfect. Mei Ling packed a picnic herself, no maid, no driver. Just the 4 of us in my rattling Proton. She sat in the back between the boys, hair tied with the rubber band, no makeup, no jewelry except the red thread around her wrist where the jade used to be. We flew the kites until the strings burned our fingers. Junhao's eagle soared highest. He screamed with joy and ran to hug his mother first, then me. For one moment, the 3 generations tangled in the same wind, and nobody knew who was pulling whom. On the drive home, she spoke without looking at me. Clause 14 says 5 years. It's been 8 months. Do you still need all 5? I kept my eyes on the road. The lawyer says 5. I'm not asking the lawyer. I thought of the nights I had lain awake listening to her cry through the wall. I thought of the cracked bangle now wrapped in red thread on the altar. I thought of my wife's photograph watching everything with that gentle, half smile that always meant forgive, but do not forget. 4 more years, I said. Then we renegotiate. She nodded small and quick and turned to stare out the window so the boys wouldn't see the tears. The factory merger went through in June. The payout was larger than even the greedy developers had dreamed. I put every cent into the boys' trust and added a new clause nobody expected upon my death. If Mei Ling has completed the full 5 years, without breach, she becomes co-trustee with us saying equal vote. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. I told him some debts are paid in time, not money. She found out the day the new documents arrived. She stood in the study holding the pages reading the same paragraph over and over. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way I hadn't seen since she was 12. You didn't have to, she whispered. I know, I said. That night, she cooked dinner for the first time without being told braised pork so tender it fell apart when you looked at it. We ate on the good plates, the ones with the tiny crack running through the roses. After the boys went to bed, she poured 2 small glasses of Hennessy, the bottle, now almost empty, and brought one to me on the veranda. We sat without speaking, listening to crickets in distant traffic. The moon was full and low, the color of old jade. Finally, she said very softly, I used to think revenge would feel warmer. I took a sip. The cognac burned clean. It never does, I answered. But living long enough to see the person you hurt become someone you can love again, that comes close. She leaned her head against the back of the chair, eyes closed. I'm sorry, Baba, she said to the night, for everything. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. The skin was thinner now, both of us veins showing blue under the moonlight. I know, girl, I said. I know. We sat like that until the glass was empty and the moon climbed higher. 2 old warriors who had fought each other to a draw and discovered the only victory worth having was the quiet that comes after. The scars remain. They always will. But scars mean the wound closed. And sometimes on nights when the wind is right and the kites are waiting, that is enough. The second year of this 5-year sentence began with a typhoon warning and ended with my 79th birthday. The storm tore half the tiles off the roof and flooded the courtyard ankle deep, but it also washed the air so clean that the next morning the sky looked like the inside of a blue bowl. Mei Ling spent 3 days on the roof with us saying and the boys passing tiles up the ladder, in a human chain hair, tied back face streaked with mud, laughing when Junwei slipped and sat in a puddle. I watched from the veranda with a cup of tea gone cold, thinking this was the first time in decades the house had sounded like a family again. She started leaving small gifts on my breakfast tray. A new pair of reading glasses when the old ones snapped. A tin of White Rabbit sweets she knew I loved as a boy. Once a single sheet of paper folded into a paper boat, the kind she used to make when she was 7. Inside it, a single line in her careful adult handwriting. Thank you for not letting me become the monster forever. I never mentioned the gifts. I simply used the glass and ate the sweets and sailed the paper boat in the pond until the rain dissolved it. The boys grew faster than bamboo after rain. Junhao shot past my shoulder and started shaving. Junwei lost the last of his baby fat and discovered football. They still came every weekend, but now they brought friends, filled the house with noise and muddy shoes and arguments over whose turn it was on the PlayStation. Mei Ling refereed with the weary patience of a mother who knows every trick. Sometimes I caught her looking at me across the chaos with something that might have been gratitude or might have been fear that it could still be taken away. I never asked which. Victor tried once more on the eve of Chinese New Year. He showed up drunk at the gate with a new BMW and a younger woman in the passenger seat shouting that he wanted to see his sons. The security camera caught everything. Mei Ling stood on the porch in her apron arms crossed and told him calmly that if he took one step onto the property, she would release the final batch of photographs, the ones involving the underage girl in Pattaya. He left tires smoking. The boys never even knew he had come. That night, she burned a whole stack of paper Ferraris and paper houses at the roadside for the wandering ghost more than I had ever seen her burn for her own mother. In the third spring, she asked permission to repaint the ancestral hall. The walls had peeled, the dragons faded to ghosts of red and gold. I told her the trust money could be used. She refused. Instead, she worked every weekend for 4 months up on scaffolding with the temple painter, restoring every scale, every claw, every curl of smoke. When it was finished, she invited the entire clan for the rededication. 300 people filled the courtyard. She knelt in front of the altar, head bowed, and offered the first 3 joss sticks to her mother, the next 3 to me while I still breathed. The relatives wept openly. I felt my throat close and looked away so no one would see an old man cry. That same year, Junhao sat for his PMR and came home with straight A's. He laid the result slip on the altar like an offering, then turned to his mother and said, I want to study engineering, Mama, like Gong Gong when he built the factory. Mei Ling's eyes filled so fast she had to leave the room. Later, I found her in the garden, sitting under the rambutan tree, pressing her face into her knees the way she did when she was 5 and the world was too big. I left her there. Some tears are private property. The nights grew quieter as the boys grew louder. Sometimes I woke at 3 a.m. and heard piano music, soft, hesitant, the same Chopin nocturne she used to play for competitions. She had bought a second-hand upright and placed it in the old nursery. I stood outside the door listening until my legs ached, remembering talent show nights when I sat in the front row holding a bouquet too large for my lap. When the last note died, she closed the lid gently, the way you close a coffin you hope never to open again. One evening in the 4th year, she brought me a thick envelope. Inside were divorce papers stamped final, a new identity card with her maiden name restored, and a bank book showing she had saved every cent of the allowance I gave her, never touched a single ringgit for clothes or holidays or anything except the boys' school fees. At the bottom was a single sheet, a handwritten letter asking permission to resume calling me Baba in front of the boys again. I read it twice, folded it small, and slipped it into the pocket over my heart. The next morning at breakfast, I said loud enough for Junwei to hear, "Pass the Kaya, Baba is hungry." She froze with the jar in her hand. The boys looked up confused. I repeated softer, "Baba is old and slow. Help your father." The jar trembled so badly, the lid rattled, but she brought it to me. When our fingers touched, she held on a second longer than necessary, eyes shining like the morning. We hung her first school painting on the wall. 4 years, 8 months, 22 days after the night she signed her confession, the lawyer called to say the 5-year compliance period would end at midnight on the coming Saturday. He asked if I wanted to schedule the handover ceremony. I told him no ceremony. Just open the gate and let the prisoner walk free. That Saturday, the boys had a football tournament in Kuala Lumpur. They would not be home until late. The house felt enormous and empty. Mei Ling cooked anyway. Hainanese chicken rice, stir-fried Kyle and tau suan for dessert, enough for 20. When everything was ready, she changed into the simple blue samfu she used to wear when helping her mother in the kitchen, tied her hair back, and waited at the dining table like a woman waiting for a verdict. At 11:57 p.m., I walked in with the new trust documents, the ones that made her co-trustee immediately no further conditions, and laid them beside her bowl. She stared at them, then at me. "It's not midnight yet," she whispered. "Close enough," I said. She picked up the pen, hands steady now, and signed her name in the same careful strokes she used when she was 10, and proud of her handwriting. When the last page was done, she pushed the papers back to me and did something I had not prepared for. She knelt. Not the broken collapse of the night at the bangles shattered, but the full traditional kneel 3 times forehead to the floor. The way daughters kneel to fathers on their wedding day or at funeral. The first knock was for the pain she caused. The second was for the greed that blinded her. The third was for the years she stole from both of us. When she rose, her eyes were dry. "I will never kneel again," she said. "Not because I don't owe it, but because you taught me a daughter who has to kneel has already lost." I helped her to her feet. My knees cracked louder than hers. We ate the cold chicken rice at midnight, just the two of us using our hands the way we did when she was small, and manners didn't matter. When the plates were empty, she cleared the table, washed every dish, wiped the counters until they gleamed. Then she came to the veranda where I sat watching the moon that had witnessed everything. She took the red thread from her wrist, the one that once bound the broken jade, and tied it gently around mine. "For luck," she said, "and for memory." I looked at the thread faded now and felt the weight of 5 years settle into something bearable. "Welcome home, daughter," I told her. She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was 5, and the world was too big, and for the first time in more than a decade, the house slept without nightmares. The first family reunion after the 5-year war ended was set for Qingming, the day we sweep the graves and remember the dead so they do not trouble the living. I chose it deliberately. Some endings need witnesses older than the living. 312 relatives poured through the gates before 9 in the morning, more than had come to my wife's funeral. They brought roast pigs, baskets of oranges, crates of tiger beer, and curiosities sharp enough to cut diamond. The courtyard overflowed with voices, all asking the same question in 10 dialects. "Is it true the prodigal daughter has come home?" Mei Ling greeted them at the door in a simple indigo Cheongsam hair in a low bun, no jewelry except the red thread on her wrist that now matched mine. She bowed to every elder, called every auntie and uncle by their proper title, and when my sister tried to whisper poison about past sins, Mei Ling smiled and said, "Auntie, today we only speak of the dead. The living have already paid." My sister's mouth opened, closed, and stayed closed. We loaded 5 buses and went to the cemetery on the hill where 3 generations of Tans lie under frangipani trees. The boys carried the paper offerings Mei Ling had folded for weeks, houses with red-tiled roofs, Mercedes cars, even a paper factory complete with tiny workers. At the graves, she knelt first, lit the joss sticks, and spoke aloud so everyone could hear. "Mother, I was unfilial to your husband. I tried to steal what he built with these 2 hands. I shamed our name. Today I return what is his, and I ask you to forgive me the way he has." She kowtowed 3 times on the hard ground, forehead touching stone until her skin bruised. The relatives stood frozen. Some cried without knowing why. I felt the wind shift as though my wife had truly heard. When she rose, she handed me the matches. I lit the offerings and watched the paper factory burn bright smoke, curling up like a soul finally released. On the way down the hill, she walked beside me, slower than the crowd, letting the others pull ahead. "I thought they would throw stones," she said quietly. "They thought about it," I answered. "But stones are heavy and grandchildren are watching." That afternoon, we held the feast in the ancestral hall she had repainted. Long tables groaned under suckling pigs and giant garupa. The lion dance troupe I hired arrived with drums loud enough to wake every ancestor within 10 kilometers. The boys beat the gongs until their palms blistered. When the lions came to bless the host, they bowed first to me, then without prompting, to Mei Ling. The drummer slipped her a red packet thick enough to choke a horse. Inside was a note from the troop master. Respect is earned twice, once when you lose it, once when you carry it home. She cried in the kitchen while washing dishes no one asked her to wash. I pretended not to see. Later, when the old men were drunk and the children asleep under tables, the clan elders called us both to the front. The head elder, Uncle Hok Chun, 92 and still sharp as a razor, stood with the help of two grandsons and spoke in a voice that carried to the back. Tan Boon sang, he said, using my full name so the ancestors would hear, you guarded the family honor with a hard hand. Some say too hard, but today we see the hand opened. Mei Ling, you broke filial piety and mended it with your own bones. This is rare. From this day the Tan family door is whole again. He took a red silk banner embroidered with the family crest and tied it around both our wrists together, binding us the way wedding couples are bound, the way coffin bearers are bound, two people who have walked through fire and come out on the same side. The courtyard erupted in cheers and firecrackers. Someone started singing the old Hawkins song about children returning home. Mei Ling's hand trembled in mine, but she did not pull away. That night, the house was so full we slept three to a room, like in the old days. I woke before dawn and found her on the veranda, wrapping leftover roast pork and banana leaves for the poorer cousins to take home. She had been doing it since midnight. I stood in the doorway watching the woman my daughter had become. She sensed me and spoke without turning. Do you remember the first time you brought me to this house after Mother died? I was 12. You said this is yours one day, but only if you deserve it. I remember I didn't deserve it then. You do now. She tied the last packet, stacked it neatly, then finally faced me. Moonlight silvered the gray, in her hair gray, she had earned. I will never ask for more than the trust gives the boys, she said. But if you ever want to add my name to the house deed, I will sign it with the same pen I used to sign my confession. Same hand, different heart. I stepped forward and untied the red silk banner from my wrist. The fabric was warm from my skin. I tied it around her wrist alone. The house already knows its mistress, I told her. Deeds are for strangers. She pressed her forehead to my shoulder the way she did when she was 5, and the thunder scared her. I felt her tears soak through my shirt, hot and wordless. Behind us, the ancestral hall glowed with the last of the paper offerings still burning in the courtyard. Tiny golden windows lighting up the dark. Somewhere in that smoke, my wife was smiling. The war was over. The revenge had done its work. It had not destroyed my daughter. It had saved her. And in the saving, it had saved the old man too. The morning the ironic twist finally revealed itself, I was 81, and the rambutan tree was heavy with fruit, the color of fresh blood. Junhao, now 17 and taller than me, carried the ladder, while Junwei, 14 and all elbows, held the basket. Mei Ling stood beneath the branches in an old t-shirt of mine hair twisted up with a pencil, directing them the way her mother once directed factory workers, sharp, precise, loving, in the way only strict people can love. I sat on the veranda pretending to read the newspaper, but really I watched the three of them move like a single body, son, reaching, mother, catching younger son, stealing fruit straight from the basket, and laughing when she swatted him. The sound of their laughter floated across the courtyard and settled in my chest like warm honey. That was when the lawyer's car rolled up the gravel drive. He stepped out in his usual funereal black suit, carrying not a briefcase, but a thick yellow envelope, sealed with red wax, the kind we use only for death or birth. My heart gave one slow, heavy knock. I thought perhaps the cancer the doctors had whispered about last year had finally sent its summons. Mei Ling saw my face and came running barefoot, rambutan juice still on her fingers. Baba. What is it? I took the envelope. My name was written in her handwriting, my daughter's careful adult script, the same one that once signed a confession and later signed 5 years of atonement. I broke the seal. Inside was a single document thick as a Bible and a smaller envelope addressed to the boys. The document was a new will, hers. In it, she left everything she owned. Everything she would ever own, every future cent of the allowance that would continue Tokanu. Until my death, every cent she had saved, scrubbing away pride for 14 years, to a new charitable trust whose sole beneficiary was listed as Tan Boon Seng, my father for as long as he shall live. After me, it would fund scholarships for children of single fathers, factory workers, anyone who had ever been abandoned by family. The trust was to be called the Cracked Bangle Foundation. At the bottom in her own hand, she had written, "To the man who could have destroyed me and chose to rebuild me instead. You taught me that the sweetest revenge is not making someone suffer, but making them unable to imagine hurting you ever again. I love you, Baba. Forgive the daughter who finally learned how to be one." I read it twice. The third time, my hands shook so badly the pages rattled like dry leaves. Mei Ling knelt in front of me, slowly this time. No drama, just a woman kneeling to an old man whose knees were worse than hers. "I had the lawyer prepare it last year," she said quietly. "After the night you let me call you Baba again in front of Junwei. I didn't want to wait until I was dead to give you back what I tried to steal." I looked at her, then at the gray in her hair, the small scar on her forehead. From the night the real bangle broke, the red thread still on her wrist, now faded almost white. "You think this is revenge?" I asked, voice rough. She smiled the same lopsided smile she had at 6 when she lost her front tooth. "No, Baba. This is the punchline. You spent 5 years making me regret everything. I spent the next 9 making sure you would never have to regret forgiving me." Behind her, the boys had stopped picking fruit. They stood holding the basket between them, sensing something larger than breakfast was happening. I folded the will carefully. The way you fold a love letter you will read every night for the rest of your life. Then I did something I had not done since the night she came home from running away. At 16, I opened my arms. She fell into them like a child, forehead against my shoulder, and I felt her whole body shake with silent, relieved laughter, the sound of a war that had finally completely, impossibly ended in surrender on both sides. Junhao dropped the basket. Rambutans rolled everywhere, red as heartbeats. He and Junwei ran to us, threw their arms around both of us, and for one perfect moment, the 4 of us stood tangled together under the old tree, while fruit bled sweet on the ground, and the morning sun lit us up like a photograph no one would ever need to hide. The ironic twist was not that I had won. It was that she had won me back so completely that winning no longer mattered. The sweetest revenge of all was the day my daughter looked up from the ruins I had forced her to sit in and built a palace big enough for both of us to live in without ever having to bow again. I held her tight and whispered the only words left. "Thank you for coming home, Mei Ling." She laughed through the tears soaking my shirt. "Thank you for leaving the door open, Baba." And somewhere above us in the branches, heavy with fruit, the cracked bangle that had once cut us both finally stopped bleeding. The first time she called me Baba again in public, it was at Junhao's university graduation, and the sound of it hit me harder than any slap she ever gave. We sat in the front row of the great hall, the 3 of us dressed like ordinary people, no bodyguards, no lawyers, no red threads on our wrists because we no longer needed reminders. Junhao walked across the stage in his black gown, collected his engineering degree, and when they asked who he wished to thank, he looked straight at us and said into the microphone, "My mother who taught me strength, and my grandfather who taught me everything else." The audience applauded politely. Mei Ling's hand found mine under the program, and he squeezed so hard I felt bones grind. Tears rolled down her cheeks in perfect silence, the way rain rolls down glass without sound. After the ceremony, we stood in the courtyard taking photographs. Relatives who once crossed the street to avoid us now queued to hug her. Aunts who had called her that ungrateful girl for 15 years now pressed Ang Pao into her palms and then told her how proud her mother would be. She accepted every hug, every packet, every tearful apology, with the same small bow and the same sentence, "Thank you for waiting." That night, we held a small dinner at the old house, just 20 people, the ones who had stayed through every season of fire. The boys carried the tables into the courtyard under the rambutan tree. We ate off the good plates with the cracked roses, drank the last bottle of Hennessy I had been saving since my 60th birthday, and when the moon rose full and white, Mei Ling stood on a chair and spoke to everyone. "I once thought family was something you inherit," she said. "Then I tried to steal it. Then I lost it. Then I earned it back, one bowl of chicken rice, one weekend, one cracked forehead at a time. Tonight I am the richest woman in Malaysia because I have a father who refused to let me stay broken." She looked straight at me. "And because he is stubborn enough to live forever just to make sure I never forget how." Laughter and tears mixed like cognac and ice. Someone started clapping. Soon the whole courtyard was on its feet. I stayed seated, old man's knees, but I raised my glass and drank to the only victory that ever mattered. Later, when the guests had gone and the boys were asleep, she found me on the veranda shelling groundnuts into a bowl, the way my wife used to do when we were young and poor and happy. She sat beside me without speaking for a long time. Finally, she said, "Do you regret any of it, Baba? The recordings, the trust, the 5 years of prison without walls." I thought of the night the bangles shattered, of her kneeling in the study, of the taste of blood, when she slapped me, of the first time Junwei called me Gong Gong and ran into my arms instead of hers. "No," I said, "because regret is what you feel when you lose something worth keeping. I never lost you. I just made you walk through fire to find your way back. And you did." She rested her head on my shoulder, lighter now. The weight of shame finally burned away. "I used to dream you died before I could fix it," she whispered. "Every night I woke up terrified I would be too late. I put my arm around her, the way I did when she was 5 and afraid of thunder. I'm too mean to die," I told her. "I still have to watch you become the woman your mother always knew you could be." She laughed, the sound young and free, the laugh I had not heard since before Victor, before greed, before the war. Under the rambutan tree, the moonlight painted silver on the ground where red fruit had fallen and split open, sweet and ruined and perfect. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the two halves of the broken jade bangle still wrapped in the faded red thread. She had glued them, not perfectly, the crack still showed, but whole enough to wear. "I had it repaired," she said, "not to hide the crack, to prove cracks can hold." She slipped it onto my wrist first, then hers, side by side, father and daughter wearing the same scar. Then she did something no document, no lawyer, no revenge could ever have forced. She knelt not in submission, but in reverence, and pressed her forehead to my knee, the way brides do to fathers who have given everything. Only this time she was not asking for forgiveness. She was giving it. "I love you, Baba," she said, clear and steady. "Thank you for the worst and best years of my life." I placed my hand on her head, old fingers trembling in gray hair, and felt every wound we had ever given each other close at last. The night held its breath. Somewhere in the dark, the ancestors nodded, satisfied. And for the first time since she was 3 years old and crying in my arms from colic, I was not the strongest man alive. I was simply the happiest. I died on a Tuesday in early May, 3 weeks after my 86th birthday, quietly the way old men are supposed to die, when the story had finally said everything it needed to say. The evening before, Mei Ling had cooked my favorite dish, pig's stomach soup, with peppercorns so fierce they made the boys cough and laugh. We ate in the courtyard under strings of bulbs Junhao had hung for no reason except that he was 22 now and believed in small happinesses. Junwei, 19, and home from university, played the guitar he had taught himself during the years he spent watching his mother rebuild herself. Mei Ling sat beside me, shoulder to shoulder, like we were teenagers again, and when the soup was finished, she refilled my bowl without asking, the way her mother used to do. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, but I said nothing. Old men know the difference between indigestion and departure. I simply leaned back, looked at the three of them, lit gold by the bulbs, and thought, this is enough, more than enough. I went to bed early. She tucked the mosquito net the way she had when I was sick during the war years, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Sleep well, Baba. See you tomorrow." I did not see tomorrow. They found me at dawn, lying on my right side, one hand tucked under my cheek, the way I slept when I was a boy in the kampong. On the bedside table was the repaired jade bangle, the red thread now white with age, and a single sheet of paper in my shaky old man writing, "To my daughter Mei Ling, you were the storm that nearly killed me. You became the harbor that saved me. Take the house, the land, the factory, the cracked bangle, and every rambutan this tree will ever bear. They were always yours. I was only keeping them warm. Tell the boys their grandfather left smiling, because he finally understood the sweetest revenge is living long enough to watch your child become the person you always prayed they would be, and then having them hold your hand while you leave. I love you more than all the years we lost. Baba." The funeral was larger than the reunion, larger than my wife's, larger than anything the town had seen. Thousands came. Factory workers I had forgotten I employed stood in the rain with their heads bowed. The temple committee closed the road for 3 days. The lion dancers came again, drums so loud they rattled the coffin lid. Mei Ling wore white hair loose and undyed the cracked bangle on her wrist, catching at every camera flash. She did not cry in public. She greeted every mourner, accepted every joss stick, thanked every person who told her what a good daughter she had become. Only the boys saw her break later in the ancestral hall when she laid my favorite teapot on the altar and finally whispered, "You win, old man. You win everything." On the 40th day, she opened the Crack Bangle Foundation with the money I had left her and the money she had never touched. The first scholarship went to a girl whose father raised her alone after her mother tried to sell the family home. The second went to a boy who wanted to study engineering because his grandfather had built a factory with his bare hands. Every year on Qingming, she brings the boys, no longer boys, now men with their own lives, and we sweep my grave together. She burns paper, cognac, paper groundnuts, a paper rambutan tree, heavy with fruit. She kneels, lights the joss sticks, and speaks aloud so the wind can carry it to me. "Baba, the tree is fruiting again. The house is too big now, but we keep your room exactly the same. The factory is theirs one day, but the stories are ours forever. I still cook your pig's stomach soup every Tuesday. The boys fight over the peppercorns the way we used to fight over everything else. You were right. Cracks can hold. And love the kind that survives revenge is the strongest thing in the world." Then she stands, brushes the dirt from her knees, and smiles the way she did when she was 6 and missing a front tooth. "I kept the door open, Baba, just like you taught me. And somewhere, wherever stubborn old men go when their work is finally done, I smile back. Because the war ended the only way it ever could, with both of us victorious, both of us scarred, both of us home.